Have you ever thought about what it means concretely to flee war, leaving your home, not knowing whether it will be there when you return, bringing with you only the bare minimum needed to get by, leaving your community, your friends, your relatives, your school, and your workplace, and then, of course, the exposure to or constant risk of violence? Well, this is what the world's nearly 30 million refugees have gone through. It's an experience that often brings both short and long-term trauma as well. And it's something that Zarlasht Halaimzai knows all too well. Drawing on her own experience in 2016, she founded an organization that offers psychosocial support to the forcibly displaced. She now joins me for perspective. Zarlasht, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Good morning.
So
Thank you for having me.
You are a refugee yourself. Can you start by telling us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I'm a former refugee from Afghanistan. My family was displaced when I was 11 years old from Kabul, in very similar circumstances that we're seeing Afghans be displaced, Ukrainians be displaced at the moment. And we were exiled essentially for 4 years before we sought asylum in the UK. And when we settled here in the late 90s, that's essentially when my childhood and my life really began. I started going to school and university and started my career here.
What kind of things did you see on your journey then that influenced your decision to later focus on trauma?
It's, as you might imagine, having to leave your home, your family, your community, your language, all the things that make us feel safe, if that gets disrupted and you're dislocated from that, it has an enormous psychological consequence on anybody. And so for my family, we felt incredibly distressed when we were leaving our home. We had to separate from, my grandmother, my uncles, my cousins, all the kind of people that you grow up with. And then for 4 years, we had no idea what we were going to do, where we're going to go. My parents, what they really wanted was to go back. We wanted to go back home, but the situation in Afghanistan was getting worse and worse and worse. And, so all the years of being uncertain about what the future is, again, takes psychological toll. And then resettlement itself, even though a lot of people think that that's when refugee journeys end and you arrive in safety, it's another really challenging step in that journey where you have to adapt to a completely new country. Often, you don't know how things work, from registering to a doctor to how the school system works. All of these things add up and can cause enormous pain and distress to people. So the work that we do at Amna is all about helping refugees feel safe as they're going through this journey, to have a community, to have spaces where they can rely on each other and have a network of support around them. And when they resettle, to have the support they need to integrate into their new home.
Now, what kind of methods does your organization, Amna, do concretely to address some of these issues?
We provide psychosocial care, which means that we provide non-clinical psychological and emotional support. It's mostly through building community, providing safe spaces. We use mindfulness and art. We use a lot of methodologies that help children and parents feel less stressed and teach them skills to regulate when they're going through this incredibly stressful experience. We provide a lot of training to frontline workers, because often frontline workers like nurses and teachers and humanitarians who receiving refugees don't have the knowledge about their context and where they're coming from. So we do quite a lot of work with frontline workers to make sure they're prepared as if refugees come into their communities.
You mentioned that it's kind of community-based, but you said that there's no clinical component. I'm curious to know why. Is it a conscious decision on your part to not have a clinical component?
Yes, I mean, a big part of it is that what people are feeling and bringing into our spaces are normal human reactions to what's happening to them. So the grief and the stress and the pain that they feel is very normal. If anyone loses their home, that's how they would feel. So we don't want to diagnose people with trauma. We don't want to pathologize their feelings. And the way that we think that we can have the most impact is to create spaces where they can return to a sense of safety in their body and in their community. And most of the time, and there's a lot of evidence for this, if you provide light touch, non-clinical interventions to people who are going through these kind of experiences, that can go a long way in supporting their mental health and preventing long-term psychological disorders that might require clinical interventions.
So moving on, Zarlasht, I'm curious, because you've worked on several different refugee crises in Calais, in Greece, and now on the Polish border, do you yourself see a difference in how refugees are treated?
Absolutely. There is clearly a difference. It's, what I took away from Poland and what we're seeing now is there is a response in the way in a way that we should respond to refugees. There's Poland is being very welcoming, as are a lot of other European countries, to people coming out of Ukraine. There's a recognition that these people have been through really quite difficult and traumatic experiences, and as they come out, there's support available to help them recover and to help them prevent, any additional suffering as they come out into a new country. This is something that's not happening for a lot of refugees coming out of Syria, Afghanistan. So in Greece at the moment, there is a very hostile policy towards those refugees that are coming out of places in the Middle East and Afghanistan, where they're being put in detention centers. They're prevented from getting, a settled status. And in the country of my citizenship, Britain, we've essentially criminalized seeking asylum. And this is very, very worrying, because what we need to do as a European community is treat refugees with the compassion and humanity that they deserve. And that means upholding refugee conventions and supporting them when they come into our countries.
And of course, not adding on additional trauma by discriminatory policies. Thank you so much, Zarlasht Halaimzai, for your work and for coming on the show today. Unfortunately, we have to keep it there.
Thank you so much for having me.